You're standing in a market in Timbuktu. It's 1510. There's no bookstore. There's no printing press anywhere within 3,000 kilometers. There's no ad to cart. And yet the man in front of you, a trader who just crossed the most dangerous desert on earth to get here, is not selling gold. He's not selling salt. He's selling books. And here's the part that should break your brain a little. In this city, at this moment, the books are worth more than the gold. That is not a poetic exaggeration. 16th century travelers wrote it down, plainly, like a stock report. In Timbuktu, the book trade was the most profitable business in town, in the middle of the Sahara. In a city your school textbook probably used as a punchline for the middle of nowhere. So, why was Timbuktu full of books? Who wrote them? Who read them? And why did generations of families risk their lives right up to literally a few years ago to keep them hidden? The evidence for this is genuinely incredible. Let's get into it. But first, we need to fix the biggest misconception in geography. Because when people say from here to Timbuktu, they mean the end of the world, the middle of nothing. And that's exactly backwards. Timbuktu wasn't the middle of nowhere. Timbuktu was the middle of everything. Look at a map. The Sahara Desert is a sea. Not like a sea. Economically, it functioned exactly like one. Camel caravans were the ships. Oases were the harbors. And any port city where the desert sea meets the Niger River, where the camels meet the canoes, becomes a Dubai. That's Timbuktu. Founded around 1100 as a seasonal camp by Tuareg nomads, it sat at the exact handshake point of two worlds, salt coming down from the desert mines in the north and gold coming up from the forests of West Africa in the south. Salt, by the way, was not a seasoning. In the Sahel, salt was survival. Your body loses it constantly in that heat, and there's basically none in the local diet. At certain times and places, salt traded for its weight in gold, which means Timbuktu's economy ran on two currencies, one that sparkles and one you can eat. So by the 1300s, Timbuktu is rich. But rich is not the story. Plenty of cities get rich. The story is what Timbuktu decided to buy with its money. Enter Mansa Musa, king of the Mali Empire. A man so wealthy that when he passed through Cairo in 1324 on his pilgrimage to Mecca, he gave away so much gold he crashed the Egyptian gold market. And we're doing a whole video on him, so hold that thought. What matters here is what Musa brought back from that journey. Not souvenirs, scholars, architects, and books. Crates and crates of books. Musa had seen the great learning centers of the Islamic world, and he decided his empire would have one too. He commissioned the Jingwereber Mosque, poured money into scholarship, and turbocharged something that had already been quietly growing in Timbuktu for 3 centuries. A university. The University of Sankore. Founded in 989, that's 1,000 years ago, and roughly a century before Oxford, by the city's chief judge, Al-Qadi Aqib ibn Mahmud. By its golden age in the 1500s, Sankore and Timbuktu's other schools hosted an estimated 25,000 students. 25,000. In a desert city. At a time when most of Europe's universities would have called a few hundred students a good year. And here's where I need you to throw away the image in your head, because Sankore didn't look like a campus with a quad and a mascot. It was a network, a constellation of mosques and private homes, each anchored by a scholar. You didn't enroll in a university. You attached yourself to a master, the way an apprentice attaches to a blacksmith. You worked through the curriculum book by book, grammar, logic, law, astronomy, medicine, mathematics. And when your master judged you ready, you received your ijaza, your license to teach. Your degree was a chain of names. Your teacher, your teacher's teacher, back through generations. Your diploma was a genealogy of knowledge. And let me tell you what a day of study actually looked like, because it was intense. A student's morning started before dawn with memorization. You recited yesterday's text back to your master word perfect before you were allowed to touch today's. Afternoons were for commentary and debate. What does the text mean? Where is it wrong? Who disagrees? Evenings. Astronomy on the rooftops, tracking stars over the desert, working out the calendar, the direction of Mecca, the timing of the seasons. There were no semesters. You finished a book when you finished the book. Some students stayed 10 years, some stayed for life. Now, the books themselves. What was actually in the famous manuscripts of Timbuktu? Everything. And I mean everything. Treatises on astronomy tracking the orbits of planets. Medical texts on surgery, on nutrition, on the healing properties of desert plants. Mathematics, algebra, geometry, arithmetic for splitting inheritances, which, trust me, caused as much family drama then as it does now. Legal opinions, history, poetry, music theory, letters between scholars arguing about points of logic with the energy of a modern comment section, contracts, even, and I love this one, guidance on resolving marital disputes, proof that some problems are truly eternal. These weren't imported books gathering dust. Timbuktu had an entire industry of copyists. Professional scribes who reproduced texts by hand, page by page, in flowing Arabic calligraphy and in African languages like Songhai and Tamashek, written in Arabic script. Gold ink for the headings. Geometric illumination in the margins. A single fine manuscript could take months. That's why books cost more than gold. Every book was months of a master craftsman's life wrapped in leather. And the books were beautiful objects, too, covers of tooled camel and goat leather, paper that arrived by caravan, imported across the desert at enormous cost, which tells you how serious the demand was. This city imported paper across the Sahara the way other cities imported luxury silk. And in the margins of the pages, you find the best part, notes, scholars arguing with the author, corrections, jokes even. Generations of readers leaving their fingerprints in ink so that one book might carry 100 years of conversation in its margins. And Timbuktu wasn't even alone. That's the part that rewrites the map in your head. Jenne, with its great mud brick mosque, the largest mud building on earth. Gao, the imperial capital on the river. Chinguetti, far to the northwest in today's Mauritania. A whole town of desert libraries that still holds thousands of manuscripts in family collections. Scholars traveled between these cities the way players transfer between football clubs today. And yes, cities absolutely poached each other's star professors. West Africa didn't have a university. It had a university network, strung along the desert's edge like lights. And the scholars weren't anonymous. Let me introduce you to the most famous one. Ahmed Baba al-Sudani, born 1564, the last great chancellor of Sankore. The man wrote more than 60 books of his own, on law, medicine, astronomy, grammar. His personal library held over 1,600 volumes. And here's the flex of all flexes. He described his library as one of the smaller ones in his family. When invaders eventually hauled him off to Morocco in chains, the scholars of Marrakesh came to study under him. The prisoner became the professor. Today, the main manuscript research institute in Timbuktu is named after him. Which brings us to the turn in the story, because you may have noticed the word invaders. In 1591, a Moroccan army crossed the Sahara. With guns, which is deeply ironic if you watched our Steel video, and shattered the Songhai Empire that then ruled Timbuktu. The scholars were exiled or enslaved. The trade routes shifted toward the Atlantic coast, where European ships were rewriting the economics of the whole continent. The Golden Age ended. And later, when European colonizers arrived with their story that Africa had no written history, Timbuktu's libraries were a problem. A city of hundreds of thousands of African books is very inconvenient evidence when your entire empire is justified by the claim that Africans never wrote anything. So what did the families of Timbuktu do? They did the most heartbreaking, most brilliant thing imaginable. They hid the books in wooden chests buried under the sand, in holes in mud brick walls, in caves, in attics. Family by family, generation by generation, for centuries, fathers handing sons a secret. We guard these. The manuscripts became heirlooms like your grandmother's wrapper or your family's land. Except this heirloom was the written proof of African genius, sleeping in the dark, waiting. How many books are we talking about? Estimates for the manuscripts surviving around Timbuktu run to around 700,000. Not 700? Not 7,000. 700,000 manuscripts. And the story isn't even finished, because the hiding happened again. In our lifetime. In 2012, armed extremist groups seized Timbuktu, and they started burning manuscripts. A librarian named Abdelkader Haidara, a man whose family had guarded books for generations, organized what can only be described as a heist. For months, he and a quiet army of families, students, and boatmen smuggled the libraries out, in metal trunks, on donkey carts, on riverboats down the Niger, past checkpoints, one trunk at a time. Over 350,000 manuscripts moved to safety. The greatest book rescue in modern history, and it was run by librarians. Sit with that. 7 centuries apart, the same city produced the same reflex. When the world comes for the books, the people of Timbuktu save the books. So let's answer the question properly. Why was Timbuktu full of books? Because Timbuktu made a bet that most rich cities never make. Gold passes through your hands, salt dissolves, but knowledge compounds. Timbuktu took the profits of the desert trade and converted them into the only currency that appreciates forever. And it did this so successfully that its scholars corresponded across the Islamic world, its university outlasted empires, and its families were still cashing dividends of pride and identity 700 years later, hauling their ancestors' words across a river to save them from men with guns. And here's what makes this an ongoing story rather than a history lesson. We still don't fully know what's in those 700,000 manuscripts. Researchers digitizing them keep finding surprises. Records of the weather and the stars going back centuries, useful for climate science today. Legal documents showing how communities settled land disputes and freed enslaved people. Works by women scholars whose names had been forgotten. Every year, translation projects open another box, and another piece of Africa's written mind comes back into the light. The library is still being read, slowly, page by page. And one more thing, those manuscripts are still being read. Scholars today are still cataloging, digitizing, translating, still discovering what's in them. Astronomy we didn't know they knew. Medicine we didn't know they practiced. History written by Africans about Africans in African hands, centuries before anyone claimed Africans had no history. So the next time you hear from here to Timbuktu, smile, because you know what was actually there, not the end of the world, a library. At the center of it,